Hello, and welcome to the Cape Coffee Beans podcast. My name is Faden, and I'm the founder of Cape Coffee Beans, South Africa's leading retailer in the specialty coffee space. We sell everything you need to make an amazing cup of coffee at home, at the office, in the cafe, or even on the road, including equipment, accessories, and artisan roasted coffee beans, both online and in store at our headquarters in Claremont, Cape Town. This podcast is a deep dive into the world of South African specialty coffee with a focus on the brands, the businesses, and the people in the local coffee scene, many of whom I'm privileged to work with. I'll be bringing you interviews with many of these South African coffee heroes, so please do subscribe to the podcast and share it with your coffee-loving friends. Thank you for your support. Now let's get to today's episode. In today's episode, I interviewed Jonathon Robinson, one of the founders and owners of Been There Coffee. This is now episode 3 of the Cape Coffee Beans podcast, and I think that anybody that's been listening so far will agree that you can already see that although there are some common elements in terms of how people approach the coffee business, there are some distinct differences. And one of the things that I particularly enjoyed about this conversation with Jonathon is that his approach and Been There's approach generally really does come at the specialty coffee thing from a different angle. They started, I think Jonathon in the interview refers to it as the other way around, but they started from the sourcing side, really thinking about how they would get great coffees and putting a lot of thought into how to make sure that the way that they source coffees really benefits the people that are producing them. I really enjoyed learning more about this from Jonathon. I think that you will too. Now, on to the episode. Jonathon, welcome to the Cape Coffee Beans podcast. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Jonathon, now you are the founder, or one of the founders at least, of Been There, and still very much one of the active managers of Been There. And for the benefit of the listeners who haven't heard of Been There, though I assume many would have, you guys are primarily based up in Joburg, but with a few branches, including one in Cape Town. And you run one of the bigger specialty coffee roasting businesses in South Africa, and I know that you've been doing it for quite some time. We'd love to hear a lot about the origins of Been There and your passion for coffee, but I always like to start by asking guests on this podcast about their background pre-coffee. Did you have a pre-coffee career? What were you doing before?
Yeah, I definitely had a pre-coffee career. I started off, I suppose, in the BCom marketing at Wits University, and then landed up in the IT industry. So I worked 2 years at IBM, and then moved across to Dimension Data, and sold and designed Cisco networks. And then in the stock market crash of, I'm going to give my age away, but in the stock market crash of 2001. That whole dot-com crash, I quit the IT industry and took a year off to travel. And so, and then after that year, came back to South Africa, did probably a 2-year stint with an NGO called Starfish, raising funds for children orphaned or affected by AIDS, and then started Been There.
Right. Okay. There seems to be a pattern emerging because you're now the fourth person I've interviewed on this podcast, and 3 out of the 4 started their careers in IT, and I did the same thing. So maybe there's something there, IT to coffee.
Yeah. Perhaps. I mean, maybe it's just maybe it's just drinking so much coffee to stay awake in the IT industry that you eventually decide that this is a big part of your life, and perhaps it should become a career. Who knows? Yeah,
there might be something there. Before you came to start Been There, how did you get into coffee? What was kind of the beginnings of your interest in coffee?
Yeah, I think I've always, I suppose I feel like I've always loved coffee. But in actual fact, I suppose my love for coffee started when I was about 12 years old. My grandmother at that time introduced me to coffee, and she said, if you can try coffee without sugar, you'll be able to taste the aromas and flavors, and your life will be transformed. And I guess she was right. So she got me into coffee then, and I guess I've always just always just had a love for coffee. I suppose oftentimes found myself being the one making coffee, found myself behind, the machine, and yeah, I think that's probably, certainly that love for coffee came from her. She loved good coffee and good chocolate, and those two pieces definitely came from her.
Right. And did you know at any point early on in your interest that you wanted to get into the business of coffee, or did that only come later?
Yeah, that definitely came later. I think where that where that sort of realization arrived was in the year that I took off to travel after the dot-com bust of 2001, and this year of travel. During that time, I met a guy in Canada who had a Fairtrade coffee roasting business, and I think what got me excited about. I mean, I'd always been excited about coffee, but somehow, I wanted to really make an impact on the continent that I love particularly, and to discover and to uncover what fair trade meant, and the ability to, I guess, have a business in something that I loved, which is coffee, and then to have an impact in the lives of small scale farmers. That just ticked sort of both boxes, I guess. So yeah, if it hadn't been the sort of my discovery of the direct fair trade model, I probably would have just continued as a coffee lover. But this really gave me the idea that I could have a business in something I loved and impact the lives of others. So I think that's where, I guess, the two merged.
Got it. And I mean, I have to confess to the listeners that I'm perhaps benefiting from this interview more than I have from the other ones, because you and I being in different cities, I think of the brands that we work with, I probably know the least of your story, just because
Mm,
we haven't been in the same place. So it's
yeah.
interesting for me to hear more about this. But what did Being There 1.0 look like? What did the business look like when you launched it, and when was that?
Yeah, so that was in 2005, and launched it from my garage. Um, in the end of 2004, so I started. No, I mean, I realized that it was time. I'd had this time in Starfish, in an NGO, and I realized that it was time to start being there. And I started the sort of the planning process. So at the end of 2004, I took my first trip to Ethiopia, and I suppose I guess what's quite unique about being there compared to most of the roasters that I know is that I sort of reversed into coffee. So where most people start with a espresso machine and the coffee shop end, and then move maybe into roasting, and then eventually maybe into sourcing and traveling and visiting producers, etc. I started the totally opposite way. So I really knew very little about coffee, apart from the fact that I loved drinking it. So I knew very little about it, but I started my first sort of trip was to Ethiopia to find a community that we could work with, that we could buy great coffee, and bring that into South Africa. And so yeah, so I guess my direction has always been from that end, from the producer end, and then we sort of worked our way back into. So I started by sourcing green coffee from Ethiopia, having it roasted by a third party, developing the brand, working from my house and garage, and then moving into. So I sort of had about 18 months in our home before the neighbors sort of started getting a little bit, I guess, upset about the fact that we were running a business from our house. And then I moved into a friend's industrial premises in Kaya Sands, which is our industrial area of Joburg. And that's because I was trying to find the right location. So I spent about 18 months in his premises. And then eventually so I suppose 3 years after starting, we opened up our first roastery cafe at 44 Stanley. So I guess that's a bit of bit of the progression. And then, yeah, and then I suppose in 2011 we opened up in Cape Town, and then 2014 we opened up our more sort of industrial roasting location in Braamfontein.
And of course, those locations are the ones that you're still at, right? 44 Stanley in Joburg and Whale Street here in Cape Town.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah.
And so for those first couple of years when you were sourcing and having some contract roasting and then setting up your own roasting, was your primary channel to the market? Were you a wholesale business? Were you selling to other cafes?
Yeah, so that's, I mean, I suppose that I was really, really naive starting, I guess. I mean, I loved the fair trade model. I wanted to impact producers and make a difference in their lives. And I just thought, I mean, I'd seen the model that my mates in Canada had used. I just thought I was going to go and, get some coffee, bring it back, and sell it sort of as packaged filter coffee into cafes and etc. And I soon discovered, hold on, wait, people want beans and they want for espresso. And so I had this one Ethiopian Sidamo coffee that I basically sold everywhere. I think it was, looking back, it was the most incredible situation that I landed up in Ethiopia and in Sidamo because really if I could choose any coffee on the continent that is the most sort of forgiving, the most wide, has the widest sort of appeal, I would say it's an Ethiopian Sidamo. It works in everything. And so I really, was peddling one coffee because I had one coffee from one community, and it had to do everything. It had to be great as a espresso and as a plunger and as a filter. And, I sort of, no matter where I went, I just said, oh, don't worry, this coffee will do the trick, and it certainly did. So, yeah, we definitely started in that wholesale, in that wholesale space. That was always my plan. And in fact, it was probably, it was 3 years before we actually owned our own espresso machine. So, I remember my sister Sarah, who you met Sarah, didn't you?
I have met Sarah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So my sister Sarah actually competed at the very first South African Barista Champs. And at that stage, when she competed, we actually had to go and practice her set on a customer's espresso machine. We didn't even have a machine of our own. And so, yeah, as I said, very much a reversal into the coffee industry, the sourcing the coffee, getting, wholesaling it, trying to build a brand, and then moving back into, the coffee shop, and obviously the roastery. So, yeah.
And what was it that ultimately motivated you to move into the cafe space? Was it for that brand building exercise?
Yeah, I think I think we did it I feel like we did it the right way, which is that to build the hardest part in my view of building building a coffee brand is actually the marketing brand building part. I mean, making a cup of coffee is and even roasting and the cafe setup, whatever, all of that to me is not as difficult as actually the marketing, selling of coffee and building a business. That is the hard part. So I'm grateful that that we did that to start with, because I think I've noticed that as even as we opened up our own cafes in the years that we opened up our 44 Stanley and 58 and Braamfontein, in those years our sales definitely flattened a little bit before they grew again, because your focus definitely moves from customers and sort of outward focus to a little bit of a sort of an inward focus as you try and get get your own sort of roasting and cafe and all of that up and running. You tend to become a little bit more inward focused, and I suppose my reasoning was that I'd always wanted to open a cafe and have the roasting, but I wanted to be in the right location, and so it took me a long time to find 44 Stanley, which I really felt was the right and still is the right is the right location for us, but it took a while to find the right location, particularly in Joburg. Cape Town certainly seems to have a lot more sort of options in terms of favorable roasting locations, and a great combination feel. Joburg is, I didn't want to be in a shopping center, and there's just not too many options available. So it was a little bit harder work to do that. But when we opened in the the cafe roastery in 2008 in Joburg, anyway, we were right. There weren't really any other roasters around. We were sort of the only roastery in a retail space in Joburg where people could come and see the roasting process. And it was, I guess, still in the days when people were amazed by seeing a heart or a fern or whatever, in a cup of coffee. That was it was all quite unique at that point.
Yeah, very early days. I guess this was a similar time to when Origin was setting up in Cape Town, and so really,
Yes, yeah.
I guess specialty coffee was very, very early days. And how has your business evolved since then? I mean, obviously there's a big wholesale component. You have several cafes. What does the organization look like now?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose our business is generally sort of split into a few different areas. I mean, there's definitely the cafe operations, and at this stage we have the cafe in 58 Whale and 44 Stanley. So those are the two cafes. We had a little bit of a espresso bar in Braamfontein, Smith Street, but it was really, really quiet at that end of town, and we needed some extra space. Keep running out of space, it seems. So we decided to close that a year ago. So we've just got the two cafes. And then so I suppose our operations are made up of the cafe, selling of liquid coffee. Obviously the biggest aspect, which is our wholesaling of beans, and from in that space we I suppose split our business a little bit between the hospitality market, so hotels and lodges, etc., as well as then obviously some of the corporate space, and then obviously other cafes, independent cafes and restaurants, and then which I suppose we're focusing on more in COVID times, the retail environment. So we're in some pick and pays, and then some discems, and a couple of spas and independent grocery outlets as well. And then like I guess everyone is at this time really trying to grow our online presence through our own web store, as well as partnerships with Cape Coffee Beans, and other online retailers as well, I guess. So so I suppose those are the two main aspects: the wholesale beans, the cafe, and then I guess we do a bit in the machinery space. So there's all the coffee making paraphernalia, and then we do have a bit in the eventing area, some mobile events, and we have a very beautiful, I'd say new, but it's old, Land Cruiser, which drifts around Joburg as well, which we've got an espresso bar and gas powered, and available for events as well. So I suppose those are all the aspects of our business, I guess.
And there are many aspects to it, I guess. And as you're saying this, I guess it occurs to me that you probably are more aware than anyone of the fact that the coffee market in South Africa has become a lot more competitive in the last few years. It's probably nothing like it was when you first got started, and you are, I guess, competing across a lot of different channels in a lot of different ways. What do you think distinguishes Bean There from other coffee businesses out there? What do you think allows you to differentiate yourselves?
Yeah, I mean, I think that surprisingly, what differentiated us 15 years ago still seems to be differentiate us today. That being said, a lot, some of those aspects have certainly changed. But I mean, I guess what differentiated us, when we started was the fact that we did single origin coffees, and we still do single origin coffees. We do exclusively, sort of African coffees as well, and I think that's quite a unique aspect. I don't know of too many roasteries. I can't think of any actually in South Africa that just do African coffee. Most roasteries would do a combination of African, South and Centrals, etc., and a sort of a variety of blends. We have obviously done a few blends in the last few years of our single origins, but it's certainly, if you hop onto our website, you won't see any of those for sale there. So certainly our focus has been single origin, and that was very unique in 15 years ago. In fact, I can remember even going back to Sarah competing at that first Barista Champs back in whenever that was, probably 2007 maybe. Sarah competed with an Ethiopian Sidamo at those Barista Champs, and you could actually just see the judges' eyes roll as she announced the fact that she'd be competing with a single origin. In those days, it was absolutely unheard of to arrive at Barista Championships without a blend. The judges would tell you that single origins are, not balanced and, etc., and you needed a blend in order to compete. And so you immediately would have got marked down just by arriving with a single origin. Fast forward to Barista Champs today, and if you arrive with a blend, you'd be exited. I don't think anyone has really attempted to compete with blends over the last years. I think there's a whole shift in the coffee world to appreciating single origin. So I suppose that is a distinguishing factor. And then I think probably the African aspect, and then also we've always had a very, very strong sustainability angle. So right from the start, we were obviously Fairtrade certified, organic certified, rainforest, UTS. We've always had a big push towards sustainability, towards recycling, towards compostable. I think we were the, if not the first, one of the first to introduce sort of the compostable cups. So it's always been a big focus, and certainly 15 odd years ago, and even 10 years ago, it was something that was quite a distinguishing factor. And I was oftentimes told that it was something that nobody really cared about, but it certainly has changed. The world is certainly moving and has moved to a space of caring way more about the sustainability of both the planet and its people. So so I suppose those are the fair trade, single origin, the fact that I guess the fact that I source all our coffees myself has always been a distinguishing factor.
Absolutely.
We've always gone and got them ourselves, and there's not too many other roasters that I'm aware of that are doing that. Although that is also changing. It's quite looking back at when the first few years when I would visit Origin and go and visit producing communities. It was so unique. I mean, roasters never visited. We would be so well looked after, and the red carpet laid out, sometimes much to my embarrassment. It would feel very uncomfortable. But I remember in Rwanda once just saying to the head of the co-op, please don't, could you please ask, not to put on such a fanfare of singing and dancing and food and everything when we arrive. I just want to come and we really just want to come and meet the producers, and I don't want you to spend any extra sort of costs trying to looking after us. And I remember him saying, Jonathon, if you don't allow us to do this, you deprive us of the the opportunity to thank you for coming, and for the difference it makes by you buying our coffee. And so that was, I suppose, also quite unique. And that's also, although changing now, and more roasters are traveling to origin, which is exciting.
Absolutely, though my perception, and I might be wrong about this, is that within the South African specialty coffee space, I mean, certainly I know that there are roasters who will make the occasional origin trip, but I think that you guys are still pretty unique in the fact that your whole sourcing operation is structured that way. If I'm not mistaken, I don't believe that anybody else is doing the amount of direct sourcing that you are. So that, I mean, that is a very important distinguishing factor in terms of your approach, I think.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you mentioned, I mean, you touched on Fairtrade and organic and Rainforest Alliance and UTZ certifications, and obviously we could probably have a whole discussion about that. But I know that Fairtrade is certainly something that has come up in coffee. There are some people who are more supportive of the model than others, and I will say, for the benefit of the listeners, Bean There is one of the few brands that has Fairtrade certification end to end and certain organic certifications end to end. There are actually very few brands in South Africa in the coffee space that have that. Could you tell me and tell the listeners a little bit more about, what exactly does that mean? What does fair trade, one word, mean, and how is it distinct from fair trade, two words, the more generic term?
Yeah, so I mean, I often say that the nice part about the word fair trade is it pretty much explains the process, which is great. And really, at the heart of it, it is about trading fairly with producing communities. Just to maybe unpack the difference that you mentioned between the two. I mean, obviously, fair trade, one word, is a registered trademark of the fair trade organization, and fair trade, two words, is the principle of trading fairly. Obviously, you'll see on our we've got some coffees which carry the mark and are fair trade in one word, and some, as example, are sort of DRC, where no fair trade auditor will go. So it's for us, in DRC, it's a fair trade, two words, and our principles of operating is that we add the fair trade premium onto the coffee, in addition, to the price of the coffee and the quality and organic, etc. So so I suppose our model has, our whole business has been built on this primary foundation of wanting to trade fairly and with producers, and to ensure that the money we pay gets back to the communities that need it, and the producers who produce the coffee. I mean, I'd say that fair trade has, there's like any system, there's probably positives and negatives. I can only speak for the communities that we work with, and the difference that the fair trade certification makes. I think oftentimes, people don't quite. It's quite a complicated system to understand. Just the sourcing of coffee, and who gets what, and the prices that they're paid. In fact, it's probably a podcast all on its own, which is worth having at some point. It's a real sort of thing that I'm really passionate about. I think oftentimes as roasters and coffee buyers, we don't quite get to understand what monies flow back to farmers. We as the community sometimes look at the FOB price, say what did a roaster pay for the coffee, and what a roaster paid for the coffee and what the farmer got for the coffee are often very, very different. And so, for us as Bean There, it's really, it's important that we know what the farmers got for the coffee. The fair trade premiums are premiums that are added onto that price that flow back to the farmers. And so in my in my experience and in the communities that we see these fair trade premiums at work, it does make a significant difference, and certainly adds quite a significant percentage to the price that farmers do get for their coffee. I don't know if that's really answered your question well. We have to feel like you're going to go down a whole long discussion to get that, to understand that correctly. But yeah.
No, absolutely. I may need to rope you in for a subsequent episode at some point where we can get into the nitty-gritty of all of this. But I think that paints a nice picture in broad strokes for people of what that means. And you do have a unique position in the market, and that you are able to say that you're supporting communities in these ways that has been certified by external parties, and it is kind of the way you source across the board, which I think is quite unique still. And as you say, I guess it's what distinguished you back then, and it's still what distinguishes you now. And I should also point out, for the benefit of anybody listening to the podcast, that the way that you approach sourcing, I believe, correct me if you're wrong, also, if I'm wrong, is you also accomplish quite an impressive feat, which is that you are paying a premium above the normal price for your coffees. You are getting these certifications. You also, I would definitely say, are getting incredibly high quality coffee, but you're also able to offer it to the South African market at a pretty reasonable price. And I suppose that must have to do with the fact that you are doing so much of the sourcing yourself, and that there are fewer middlemen in the equation. Is that right?
Yeah, that is correct. And I think also, we've, as you would probably know, I mean, we don't have significant margins to work with. So obviously, we sort of have ourselves priced, which is, what I've always tried to be, is sort of fairly. I feel that we need to be fair traders, and is not just about us trading fairly with the producers. It's also about us trading fairly with our customers, and so we do endeavour to I guess be fair throughout. To be fair to producers, and provide the coffee at a fair price to our consumers. Which means that in order to do that, we sometimes don't make the margin that we would necessarily always like to. But I suppose that's what happens when you spread it out a little bit.
Of course. And just one last thing on the sourcing thing is that, for the benefit of anybody who doesn't know Bean There Coffees, you kind of have your 6 origins, I think it is, that you've had consistently for at least as long as I've worked with you. I mean, how long have the relationships been with the particular farms that you're sourcing those coffees from?
Yeah, I mean, so for obviously for something like Ethiopia, that goes back, the 15 years. For some of them, like Kenyan, that is like from 2007. So we sort of brought them on over time. I think I can't always remember the years, but I mean we brought on new coffees probably over the first 5 or 6 years. So and our model really is about trying to trade consistently with the same communities if possible, so that we can see lasting change. We'd really want to be able to build those long-term relationships and see the change. So we don't want to just move from community to community. We definitely look for those relationships. So in general, we try to not make too many changes. I mean, we've unfortunately had to make a change in Tanzania in the last few years, just due to challenges with government regulations and changes that the government made, which restricted our access to the coffees that we've been buying. So we've moved to a new community called Tarakia for our Tanzanian coffee, on the slopes of Kilimanjaro, sort of on the I suppose the northeastern side of Kili, up towards the Kenyan border. And that has been, although sad from one aspect in terms of losing the relationship with producers in the south, down in Mbinga, we are working with an incredible cooperative, woman-run cooperative, producing really, really great coffee. The Tanzanian coffee particularly didn't used to be my favorite. That has definitely changed. They're definitely doing a really great job. So
It is a great coffee. I really enjoy it as well. And could you just chat briefly about your approach to roasting these coffees? I mean, yeah, in broad terms, what is the approach in terms of roasting for being there?
yeah, I mean, I suppose one of our aspects, which I guess is probably something that most roasters do now, but we termed our sort of roasting philosophy the sort of optimal roast concept. So I guess we like most roasters do spend a lot of time sample roasting. So we have an Akawa sample roaster, as well as obviously the smaller Probat. So we spend a lot of time in the beginning just trying to hit that optimal point, that we can bring out the combination of the roasting and what's inherently magnificent in the bean, and trying to just really make the producers the star in that. I mean, we want to not lose those unique aspects of each of the coffees. And so I suppose our roasting style has been sort of I guess what one would describe as sort of a medium roast. I don't think any of our, or certainly none of our coffees are dark at all. Nothing goes into second crack. I think we definitely do our best not to also be too light. I think sometimes in the specialty coffee world, we've sometimes gone a little bit too light, which leaves coffees a little bit green sometimes, it makes them a little less forgiving for different brewing techniques. So I wouldn't say super light, but certainly not dark. And obviously, as you would, I know most of the listeners would probably know, we have the incredible Kath Bland, who looks after, as a Q grader, looks after that aspect for us, making sure that we get that right. And we have some great arguments as we work it all out, at the cupping table. So lots of debate, lots of discussion, lots of arguing, and spitting, and etc. Not at each other, obviously.
Of course, of course. Well, I will say that I think that you guys do an incredibly good job of making the roast profiles both accessible and versatile, but still interesting, which is actually, I mean, I'm not a roaster, but based on how often I come across those characteristics all in one, I would say that it's probably not an easy thing to achieve. So I think that that's certainly one of the things that has led to Bean There's popularity, is that these are profiles that the average coffee drinker can enjoy, but the long-time specialty drinker can also appreciate.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to describe it. It's certainly what we're aiming for. Yeah.
And shifting gears a little bit, Jonathon, maybe you can just tell us a little bit about your team. What does your team look like? Who are the people that you work with?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we are. Firstly, we're very blessed to have an incredible team, and I think I suppose a few things. One of the things I love is the fact that we people stick around, which is great, and hopefully that's because they like to. I think we certainly, as a company, seek to really pay people fairly. It's the same sort of philosophy I have for sourcing coffee, is the same philosophy for how we sell it, is the same philosophy for how we should pay people. I think fairness is really important, and so hopefully that's a reason why people stick around. They feel that they are hopefully loved and valued and paid fairly, rewarded fairly. So I think that's important. I think we're fortunate from people perspective is that because we have as a company, because we have a very strong why, a very strong reason for being in business. We, people who work for Being There know that. I mean, you can ask anyone from the cleaners to the baristas to the packers, whatever, why does Being There exist, and they will tell you, without fail, that we exist to make a sustainable difference in the lives of African coffee farmers through direct fair trade while providing meaningful employment for South Africans. And so everyone knows why we exist, and I think the knowing why you're in business. Yes, of course, we are wanting to produce great coffee, and that goes without saying. But knowing why you get up in the morning is and the difference that you want to make. So I think people who work for us have generally our fields have generally bought into why we're in business, and so that drives our organization and puts us generally all on the same page, which is exciting. So in terms of, I suppose, the ins and outs, we've got in Johannesburg there are 23 of us, and in Cape Town there are 5 of us, and so that's the organization, and then we're sort of, I guess, split between the production, some production side, some admin side, the baristas, and obviously sales and roasters and etc. So I don't know if that answers the question.
It absolutely does, and I think the only thing I'll add to it is that as a customer of Being There, I think that the result of that factor that your team knows why they're doing what they're doing is that I always experience that they tend to be quite happy people. I find that everybody at Being There seems to be quite happy in their jobs, which I suppose is a unique thing in itself, right? So as a customer, I think that that's something that comes through loud and clear. Tell me, Jonathon, what do you think the future holds for Being There? Obviously we're in a particularly strange time at the moment, but maybe looking beyond that in the medium to long term, what do you think Being There looks like in the future?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, I think if you'd done this podcast in January, you would have got a fairly different answer than you're going to get now. And I think what does the future hold for our planet at the moment, I suppose, is on all our minds, and what is the future going to look like? And I guess I've spent a lot of time over the last I guess 2 months, feels like, looking at that, and certainly I think that what the future holds for coffee is definitely bright. That's for sure. I think one thing that is a consistent sort of theme about anyone who's in any working from home locked down environment at the moment is coffee is a big feature, and I think coffee will continue to be a feature. I think that what I absolutely love about coffee is its connectedness, the way it connects people. I think that's what we're feeling that we've lost at the moment, is that connection that we have around coffee. I mean, I think that's the joy of coffee. How many dates and business meetings and friendships have been formed around this beverage. So I think the future for coffee is bright, but I think it's going to possibly look a little bit different. We are certainly focusing way more on the consumer side than we had imagined. How do we get coffee into people's homes? How do we get better equipment into people's homes? I'm sure that you've noticed that significantly. Obviously, you've pioneered the online space. I'd say in South Africa, done a fantastic job of making coffee, and the variety of coffee is accessible to people. So we're very grateful to you for that, as well as giving people a lot of opportunities and options in terms of equipment. And so I think that that will be a big a big space for for being there as well. The future is that the home the home market. And then I guess we also are looking at what other markets can we access. What other places in the world. We've dabbled a little bit in the US, a little bit in the UK, and so I guess just testing the waters in terms of other options. There's our main desire, as a company, is to grow in volume, so that we can buy more coffee at good prices, and for that to impact the lives of the farmers that we work with. So that will continue to be our aim.
And I guess that, as you say, this COVID-19 and lockdown situation, it's kind of what it's done is it's, starting to fast track South Africa along that curve of adopting both online retail and adopting specialty coffee brewing at home. So,
Yeah,
maybe in the long run we'll see some benefits from that. Hopefully there'll be some silver linings.
Mm,
Ju-
mm.
Just one last question for you, Jonathan, before we wrap up. I think that all the listeners are always interested to hear what the coffee professionals are doing in this regard. What coffee are you drinking at home these days during lockdown, and how do you tend to make it?
Yeah, so I in general, I just I work my way through, just grab whatever coffee is being roasted at Bean There, and just sort of say, what have I not had for a while. I guess I just like in general like to work through all our coffees at home. I also have got two very critical coffee drinkers in my wife and my daughter, so they also will give me very honest, straight opinions, and so that's also useful. Because I have them at home, we've got just a little Jura bean to cup on the counter, which we generally use as the morning coffee. But we've also got every other coffee apparatus, and so my daughter went on our barista course last year, and that's turned her into a good solid coffee lover. And so we've I've got Chemex and AeroPress and a couple of Bialettis and a couple of plungers. And then you may have seen recently we're doing some little coffee Olympics and some coffee hacks during this lockdown time. So we've even been making coffee with a teapot, which was actually surprisingly amazing.
Interesting.
Turns out you can, it's the joy. It really is the joy of coffee, and that's why I don't like to stick to one technique. Really, is that you can take this, the same coffee, and make it, with 5 different brewing methods, and you could honestly, if you were to cup them or to taste them blind, you may honestly think that you were experiencing different coffees altogether. And I think that's one of the joys, and I suppose sometimes the frustrations of coffee. But so. At the moment, I just working through a variety of our options, and then I do love getting coffee from other roasters. So anytime that we have a little bit of a budget at Being There to buy coffee from other people, so Kath is normally the one who sorts that out, and so I tried some of Bluebird's Guatemala yesterday. Kath and I enjoyed that, and and then just anytime I travel, I'll come back with coffee from Blue Bottle or Stumptown or wherever else. So it's just it's great to. I also enjoy sometimes just having some either some South or Central Americans, just to remind me of actually why Africans are best. Unfortunately, or fortunately, they never disappoint, actually, which is great. So, yeah.
I'm definitely a big fan of African coffee myself. I reckon that it's definitely 70 to 80% of my drinking, so I can relate.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, Jonathan, with that, I want to thank you so much. You've been very generous with your time, and I appreciate you sharing a little bit of your story. I'm sure that the listeners will enjoy hearing a bit more about being there. So thank you very much, and all the best for the rest of your lockdown.
Thank you so much. Yeah, and just from our side, thank you for your support of being there, and just for the featuring it on Cape Coffee Beans, and yeah, you've given so many, particularly I suppose home users the opportunity to sample a variety of different coffees and to really fall in love with coffee. So yeah, so just thank you from our side to you.
I appreciate that. Thank you. It's a sincere pleasure, genuinely. That brings us to the end of episode 3 of the Cape Coffee Beans podcast. I do hope that you enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed recording it. I really am left thinking after that conversation that I would love to come back and do another round, another more specific interview with Jonathon, specifically about the details of sourcing and coffee pricing. I think it's a topic that all of us, from those in the coffee business to those just consuming coffee, should understand better. So hopefully we'll do that at some point in future. In the meantime, I would encourage you to try Bean There's coffees if you haven't. As I mentioned during the interview, one of the things that I think is amazing about Bean There is that this is coffee that is top quality, that is sourced fairly, that supports very specific farmers and farmers cooperatives that you can read about on our website, on Bean There's websites, or even on the bags themselves. And I really think that they're incredible value for money. Bean There's coffees are available on the Cape Coffee Beans website, and I'll include a link to that in the show notes. I would definitely encourage you to check them out. In the meantime, if you're enjoying the podcast, please do leave us a review. Please do subscribe to the podcast and share it with your coffee loving friends. Help to get the word out. And until next time, happy brewing.